حي على الفلاح.
Al-Andalûs, Spain, in fact, is the largest country in the entirety of Europe. And so if you think of it like this, therefore, that Muslims had a very long-lasting civilization in Al-Andalûs in Spain. Their presence was for about 700 to 800 years in the largest country in Europe. We had Khilafah system of Islam running civilization in the largest country in Europe. Why did the Muslims have an interest to go to Europe, to Spain, to Al-Andalus? In the year 711, a man called Musa ibn Nusayr, who was the governor of Africa, took a young man called Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was around 19, 20 years old, and he made him the general of his army and also appointed him as governor of Tangiers. This was part of the Umayyad Khilafah decision making to go to Al-Andalus. One thing that Muslim historians write about is a popularized story. In this story, you have a person called Julian. Julian is the Count of Quetta. Quetta is the northeast, the furthest northeast of Maghreb, Morocco is Quetta, furthest northwest is the Tangiers. What happened, the story goes, that the Count of Quetta, Julian, had a problem with the king of Spain, of Al-Andalus, called Roderick. And the alleged story goes that the Count Julian of Quetta had a daughter, and the daughter was sent to Spain to study in one of the schools of King Roderick. And when she was there, she was mistreated in a bad way. And so out of his sense of vengeance or revenge, he wanted to exact against King Roderick of Spain. He allied with the Muslims, or he assisted the Muslims in arriving into Al-Andalus. This is a very popular story. She herself is popularized as Safa Rumiya. She figures prominently in that early episode of the arrival of the Muslims. And so in the year 711, Tariq bin Ziyad takes an army. He has about 500 infantry, 500 cavalry, and they cross the Straits of Gibraltar and they arrive into Al-Andalus. Gibraltar, you might know, is named after him. It's Jabal al-Tariq, the Mount of Tariq, which they named Gibraltar, named after him. When he arrives, what does he see? Who's there in Spain? Spain is ruled by the Visigothic people. And so when the Muslims arrived, these Visigoths, too many of them embraced Islam, accepted Islam, because they saw the similarity between Arianism and Islam. And others who didn't accept Muslim rule, they fled northwards, and this was mostly the Visigothic nobility. And when they fled north, they arrived right to the top of Al-Andalus, a place called Asturias. Two places, Asturias and Galicia. And these are mountains. And so the Muslims, therefore, when they're sending the armies, different districts, Seville and Granada, Cordoba, all these places. Some are accepting, like Toledo falls quite quickly to the Muslims. Cordoba, there was a long siege, they didn't accept very easily. But they didn't go as far as these Visigothic nobility went, right to the top. But the point was that the Muslims had a very strong cavalry, very strong horsemen. And the horsemen struggled to go all the way up to the mountains. And this is why they thought, well, it's only a few of them, they can't cause them damage because we shouldn't trouble ourselves too much. But it was a mistake. This initial small band of Christians in the Asturias and Galician mountains would grow. And they became, kind of a small power unto themselves. They refused to pay taxes. They were kind of independent, autonomous, small independent, autonomous rule. And so when the Muslims sent this small, contingent to try and engage with them, there was surprise attack. Now Christians, they depict this Battle of Covadonga, as a spark of the Inquisition. They depict it as the first victory of Christianity against Islam in that land. The Muslims, they say, it was more like a skirmish. But the point is, as a presence, they remained in the mountains of Asturias. Muslims, they consolidated power and rule when they first arrived into Al-Andalus. The next year, 712, July, Musa ibn Nusayr met him with a big contingent of 7,000 people. Who else was there? So it was the Christians, there were also Jews. There were Jews living in Spain. How were they treated? They were treated very badly. So before the Muslims arrived, what was happening with the Jews? The Jews were persecuted. And so when the Muslims arrived, they saw this minority of the Jews and they gave them rights. The Jews were not allowed to have synagogues, the Muslims were allowed to rebuild their synagogues. And the Muslims made a very famous treaty called the Treaty of Thermopylae. This is why you have Jewish historians like Zion Zohar says that when the Muslims crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, the Jews welcomed them as liberators from Christian rule. Now in the Treaty of Thermopylae that they made with Visigoths, the Catholics, they had rules. Not to destroy churches was one of them, not to break crucifixes was another one of them, not to disrupt them on their national holidays like on Easter or Christmas time was one of them. And it was really welcomed by the Christians because they thought, well, that's actually a great deal for us. They could worship in their own ways, in their own places, but of course under the rule of Islam. The Jews had their rights and really seemed quite a good deal for people. Except of course for the Christians of the north, and they would grow and they would grow. Now we come to the 720s. The Muslim ruler was a man called Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani. He took his army and they went to Toulouse, in France. They've taken Spain, now they're pushing further north into France. They get to Toulouse. And in Toulouse they meet an army fighting under Duke Odo of Aquitaine. And they have a victory. They defeated the army of Duke Odo of Aquitaine. Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani is celebrated as this great fighter, general. But Duke Odo of Aquitaine was present in the battle, but then he vanished, he just went away under secrecy. And they thought he had left. He had not left, he had gone to receive help from a man called Charles Martel. Charles Martel was like they call him the Prince of the Franks. But he wasn't interested. So Odo of Aquitaine is telling him that the Muslims are just coming because they've taken the whole of Spain and they're coming north, they're going to take France also. He wasn't interested because he thought they're not that powerful. They can't do that. Because remember that France was the Christian base. The Pope lived in France. The church was very strong in France. And so, not interested. And so Duke Odo then returns. And when he returns, surprise attack against Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani, and he's martyred there. In 730, the new Muslim, governor called Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi, rahimahullah, he takes his army and they go to Aquitaine itself. So the power base of Duke Odo of Aquitaine, he went straight there to Aquitaine itself. And when he gets there, again, there's a defeat of Duke Odo. Duke Odo is not there. They go as far as Bordeaux. This is France. This is like they're going further north, and there's a victory. Now Duke Odo, what does he do? He goes back to the same person that he told him not interested. He goes back to Charles Martel and he says, look, you told me that they're not strong enough, but they've just defeated us all over again in my power base of Aquitaine, so please send us help, reinforcements, do something. So Charles Martel now, he listens carefully and he agrees a date to engage the Muslims in battle in the year 732 in a very famous battle called the Battle of Tours. This is mid-France. So what happens in this Battle of Tours? This is the most decisive battle the Muslims will have with the French in France. It's winter, it's like October, November time, it's cold in France. And the Muslims, when they go there, they don't know where Charles Martel has arranged the battle. They don't know the location. Charles Martel had been preparing for the Muslims since 721. Now it's 732. He knows who they are, he knows the way that they fight, he knows the armament that they have, he knows the weapons that they have. And so what he does is he chooses the location of the battle. Okay, it's on a hill. So the Muslims have a very strong cavalry, he has a very strong infantry. And so the horses, of course, would struggle to come uphill. He arranges his army on the top, under the cover of trees. So the Muslims, Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi and his army, they're there, with the horses, they're looking up, and that's where Charles Martel's army is, but under the cover of the trees, so they can't see exactly where they are. Second thing is, when Charles Martel approached the battle scene, he went small roads, not the big roads, the small roads under cover of darkness, so they couldn't see what route they would take to the battle site. Number three, they were prepared for the winter. Prepared for the winter, they had good clothing, they could last the siege. But the Muslims, they're struggling because they don't have the right clothes. This is very cold, and 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days, and it's too long. Now they have to make a move. They have to break that deadlock. And so Abdurrahman al-Fiqi says, let's just march upwards. Now, Charles Martel, he arranges his battle in what's called a phalanx, a rectangular mass of infantry. The idea is, therefore, that there's always reinforcements in the phalanx. When the Muslims marched upwards to get to the top, where they are, the men just marched downwards, and the horses, of course, struggled to come upwards. And so they were really outmaneuvered by the Christians. It was a very decisive victory for Charles Martel, and he was really lauded, by the Christian world as Charles Martellus, Charles the Hammer, they called him. Charles, Prince of the Franks, they called him. And that is the furthest point Muslims would ever get in France. So, they tried Bordeaux, Aquitaine, and Toulouse, but not further than Tours. And this is 732. In the 700s, they're just working on consolidating their rule. They're building their army strong. So as soon as they capture a place, they appoint a governor. And then within 6, 7 months, 8 months, they appoint a new governor and a new governor. And it's too many governors. So they can't therefore stabilize their rule because it's just a sequence of quick successions of governors. But they're doing good things. And so the first capital for the Muslims of Al-Andalûs was Seville. Not for long until it moved to Cordoba. And remember that Muslims, when they went there, they'd never seen something so beautiful. But when they saw Spain, they said, wow, what on earth is that? And they fell in love with it. What happens in 750? Something very big happens. In 750, you had the Abbasid revolution. And so the Umayyad Khilafah was based in Damascus. The Abbasids had a revolt, and they took power. And you had the beginning of the Abbasid Khilafah. But there was one boy who was 19, 20 years old, who survived. They called him Saqr Quraysh, the Falcon of Quraysh. And he fled together with his brother and his son and his 2 sisters. They fled together. And the plan was to follow the Euphrates River. He's a Berber, so he has like orangish hair, so easily recognizable. And so the Abbasids sent mercenaries out to try and track him, find him. Going from Damascus, Palestine, Sinai, until they get to Egypt. The mercenaries catch up with them, and so they kind of throw themselves in the Euphrates River. And they try to swim to safety. But his brother couldn't swim too well, and so he swims back to shore. The Abbasid mercenaries are waiting for them, but he has no choice except to carry on going, and so he carries on going. Now he has a slave with him, a Berber slave called Badr. He leaves his sisters behind in a caravan because they're less likely to be harmed. They get to Egypt. Now in Egypt, there is a Berber, there is an Abbasid governor, newly appointed, who used to be Umayyad loyalist, but now he's Abbasid supporter. And he sends his mercenaries to try and find these two, Abdurrahman and his servant. And they escape him, and they arrive in Morocco in the year 755. This is 5 years. It took them 5 years since Abbasid revolution to get to the Maghrib. Now, the great bulk of Muslims in Al-Andalûs are Syrians. That's where the Umayyad Khilafah was. You had the Umayyad dynasty based in Damascus. And so what he does is he sends his servant Badr to go to Damascus and find out, like a reconnaissance mission, will they accept him if he comes into Al-Andalûs? And so he goes there and he says, it's good ground for you because they're waiting for someone like you to lead them. And so when he goes there, crosses, they welcome him and they appoint him, and he becomes the Umayyad ruler. So now it's a bit odd because you have the Abbasid Khilafah dynasty, you have the birth now of the Umayyad Khilafah, and then you have another one which is the Fatimid Shia. They have their own Khalif. These 3 kind of power bases at the same time. But he does a beautiful thing, Abdurrahman, because he deals with the people with justice, and they love him because he's from them. The most important ruler was not Abdurrahman the first Saqr Quraysh. It was in fact Abdurrahman the third. He was the most celebrated Muslim ruler. He was the Khalif, and he really transformed Al-Andalûs. Abdurrahman III worked with Jewish people as well as Christians. He made, in that time, what came to be known as convivencia, which is the coexistence of Muslim Jews and Christians together, building this amazing civilization. He had a Jewish diplomat called Hasdai ibn Shaprut. He would send him to major centers like Constantinople, Rome, to bring them in and see the splendor of Al-Andalûs. What was happening in Al-Andalûs? The Muslims, Abdurrahman III's great idea, great thinking, one of the first things he did was he reduced the taxes upon the people. And so therefore he dealt with them with a lot of mercy, with a lot of kindness and goodness, and they really began to love him. He sought to do away with divisions. So rather than having independent rulers think about one single rule, he did that. Qurtuba was the capital of Al-Andalus. So Seville for a short time, and then Qurtuba was the main city. And Qurtuba became known as the city of lights. Qurtuba was the first lighted lamp city. 10,000 lamps in the city of Qurtuba. In that one city, you had 300 libraries. 300 libraries in one city. 600 masajid. 50 hospitals in Qurtuba. Abdurrahman III, the Khalif, has a personal library of 300,000 books. Putting the emphasis on learning, he sets up makatib for blind students, makatib for disabled students. You know what was the madhab that was in Spain? Was the Maliki madhab. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi was the Maliki Imam of Al-Andalus. He studied the Muwatta at the feet of Imam Malik himself. They made beautiful homes and houses, irrigations. From Seville you had Abu al-Khair. Abu al-Khair authored his Kitab al-Falaha, the book of farming. Ibn al-Awwam al-Ishbili, he wrote a book describing more than 568 types of plants. These people were geniuses. I mean, they were scholars in their own fields. You know, in Seville, Allah Akbar, you had women, Valada, and she worked on manuscript illumination. She was a poetess. You had so many others like her. You know, you had great people working in those lands. Qurtuba, for example, you had science. Az-Zahrawi, the master of surgery, of science. You had Ibn Sina, again, philosophy, science, the work on ethics, for example. Ibn Rushd, Ibn Zawar. These were from Al-Andalus. Imam al-Qurtubi, the Imam of Qurtuba. Great scholars are emerging, scientists, luminaries. And so all these great personalities, Muslims are emerging. You know, at the same time in Baghdad, what's happening is you have the Dar al-Hikmah. Dar al-Hikmah is another place that's a land of wisdom, that's a place of learning. So you had Al-Khawarizmi, algorithms are named after him. Now, also from him is algebra, because of his book, Kitab al-Jabr. So what's happening therefore is that when the Muslims are creating all these amazing things in the Western world, they don't have anything. No focus on sciences, or not as much as what the Muslims have. And so you have Westerners who are now traveling all the way to Al-Andalus, and they're learning from the Muslims. Famous names like Petrus Alfonsi. And then he traveled northwards, he went to England, he became the surgeon, I think, for King Henry, and he introduced to the Western world what the Muslims are learning of science, of mathematics. Michael Scott was the one, I think, who translated the astronomical tables of Al-Khawarizmi. So the Muslims, therefore, for this period, are really focused on learning and building a civilization. Abdurrahman III builds a new city called Madinatu Zahra, and he builds this city from scratch in 1 year, an entire new city. And this whole city was therefore to show the Western world. They would bring in these diplomats and dignitaries to see the splendor of Al-Andalus, a new city just for the purpose of pomp. It's quite sad, actually, to be honest with you. It's quite a sad thing, because although a lot of achievements are being made and a lot of things are happening, and historians reflect back on it, and they say, well, where were things going wrong? Well, at one point, you run the risk of turning the elegance into excess, elegance into extravagance. Who's heard of Masjid Qurtuba? At that time it was the most grand mosque in the world, Masjid Qurtuba. Right now it's a chapel. And so, after this great period of strength, this great period of wonder and science and maths and astronomy and learning and reading and literature, all of this, soon enough the Muslims, they descended into division. And so all these major city centers, Seville, Cordoba, Granada, had autonomous rule. Now, who's really most happy with this? Of course, it's the Christians of Galicia and Asturias. It's the one who were just a few in the beginning, the Visigothic nobility. Now they've grown, hundreds of years have passed, they've grown in power and strength. And so now they're coming down, and they're fighting against these centers, rule, and they're fighting some against the others. The Muslim rulers are so concerned that they stay in power, and every year they're paying an annual tribute, to stay protected and safe. That's like the beginning of the downfall, division. That's the beginning of the downfall for the Muslims. There were efforts, alhamdulillah, by people like Yusuf ibn Tashfin from the Maghrib. This is like in the 12th century, begin 12th century. They would invite him from the Maghrib to Al-Andalûs to fight the Christians with their help. And then on 3 occasions they would say to him, go back home now, we don't want you here with us. On the 3rd time, however, he stayed there, and he defeated these Muluk al-Tawa'if, and he brought back a semblance of the previous unity that existed. And that lasted for a while, until the Muslims had one very crushing defeat in the year 1212 in the Battle of Las Navas to Tolosa, and they never recovered really from that defeat. That gave the Christians the biggest stronghold against the Muslims. And then really what followed, in the next centuries or so, is the Muslims were losing their lands. They lost Seville 1246, 1247. Even before that, James I of Aragon expels 100,000 Muslims from Aragon. Muslims have to wear different colored clothing to be recognized as Muslims. Muslims are charged higher taxes. Muslims are not allowed to live in the city centers, they have to live outside. You had walled compounds. They lose Seville, Aragon, Arcos, all these places, and they're finding their last place of refuge in Granada. And then you get to like 1501, this is even before the Muslims get to Granada to make it their base. There was a big fire in Granada, 1501, the Great Fire of Granada, in the city center of Granada, where they burnt all the books. So all the books we're speaking about, in a grand fire, they burnt everything. All the Qur'ans, Hadith, books of tafsir, books of science, except the ones that were gold and silver binded, because they could use that to make money. But they just burnt everything. And so then began the process of Muslims living in secrecy. This is also a remarkable episode in the history of the Moriscos. The Moriscos were the Muslims who, outwardly Catholics, but inwardly they were Muslims. Everything was prohibited. Now they get to a stage where Arabic, and so they sought to ban Arabic for all people. And so you had this great period of the Moriscos. So 1501, all the books are banned. They all get to Granada. One good thing was the fact they take all their skills with them, right? So all these scientists and scholars, they all go to one city called Granada, and they make it a beautiful city. They build the Alhambra Palace. And you might have noticed all around Alhambra, what's written everywhere? La ghalib illa Allah. There's no victor except Allah, no victor except Allah. Everywhere in the whole of Alhambra. But of course, where they got to was a consequence of some things, in this whole period the Crusades happened. This is another reason why the Christians became so strong. A lot of evidence that the first crusading front was Spain, not Al-Quds. And so, they couldn't survive very long. At the end they made terms, with the Christians, and that was really the end of the Muslim existence in Al-Andalûs. Allah in the Quran says, these are days we alter among the people. There was a very famous poet, scholar called Al-Rundi, wrote a poem at the fall of Seville. He says, everything, nothing reaches its perfection right? Everything has a fault, has a defect. Nothing will last forever. Everything will come down. And these lands, he says, were not supposed to last forever. Qarun, that Allah mentions in the Quran, where is all of his gold today? Where is Ad and Thamud, these great, terrible, tyrannical civilizations? Where are they today? How many scholars passed through Qurtuba once upon a time? Where is it today? He says, for all of them came something that they could not return from until they passed, and it's as if they didn't exist there in the first place. Meaning death came to every single one of them. And then we will pass as if we weren't even there in the first place. And this was a reminder, therefore, not to lament, not to feel defeated, no, to learn lessons from. And Spain really is the only place in the world where I think Islam was established in full and removed in full. Established in full. Khilafah, Khalif, civilization, all of this learning, scholars, and then removed in full. And so, a lot of lessons for us to learn, about this place. Assalamu alaikum.